This episode is brought to you by my friend Rebecca Walser, a financial expert who can help you protect your wealth. Book your free call with her team by going to friendofdinesh.com. That's friendofdinesh.com. Coming up, I'll examine the key issues involved in the Tyree Nichols killing. I'll also reveal how an obscure group involving John Podesta and Bill Kristol fed lies to the media about Russian involvement in U.S. elections. I'll do a postmortem on Ronna McDaniel's Pyrrhic victory at the Republican National Committee, and Middle East expert Erick Stakelbeck joins me. We're going to talk about tensions between Biden and Netanyahu. This is the Dinesh D'Souza Show.
America needs this voice. The times are crazy. In a time of confusion, division, and lies, we need a brave voice of reason, understanding, and truth. This is the Dinesh D'Souza Podcast.
I'd like to offer some thoughts on the Tyree Nichols killing. Tyree Nichols is a black guy, lived in the area of Memphis, and on January 7th of this year, he was in his car, according to police, driving recklessly, although we haven't seen any video of that. The police, nevertheless, and this part of it is on video, they pull him over, and then they walk up to the car and yank him out of the car and tell him to get on the ground. He seems to be complying. He says, okay, man. And while he's on the ground, they tase him. They hit him with a taser, at which point I think natural flight kicks in and he begins to run. So they chase him down and unbelievably beat him to death. So this is, anyone who's seen the video, Debbie and I watched it. I'd watched one version of it yesterday. I watched another version this morning. It's really hard to justify. In fact, Debbie's reaction was she goes, well, this is worse than what Derek Chauvin did to George Floyd. This is inexcusable. However, the policemen, the 4 cops who did this, were black. There wasn't a white policeman involved at all. And so for the left, this has become a little bit of a problem. Obviously, it is a clear case. I think it's a clear case for anyone who sees the video of police brutality. And the arrest of these 4 cops and the 5 cops, Debbie says, 5 cops, who apparently are going to be charged with kidnapping and with second-degree murder. Now, the kidnapping, to me, is a little weird. It's true that they sort of pulled him out of the car and one could argue took possession of him, but I don't think that really makes any sense. They weren't kidnapping him. But the second-degree murder charge, in other words, cops out of control, that is quite evident if you watch the footage. But this is black on black. And in a city where the police captain, I saw a statement that she made, black woman, mayor of the city is black, so it's a black political establishment. So this is police brutality, but it's not race. It's not a racial issue. But for the left, it has to be a racist issue. It has to be a racial issue. So how do you make a non-racial issue into a racial issue? Well, the short answer is that you argue that white supremacy operates its machinations in such a way that it can even make black cops behave in this way. And I saw a comment by Joe Walsh. It doesn't matter what race the cops are. It only matters what race Tyree Nichols was. Actually, the race of both matters. And you know why? Really for 2 reasons. The first one is the city of Memphis, this was a few years ago, back to 2020, implemented an expanded affirmative action program. It was a diversity program. Our police force is not sufficiently diverse, and apparently they felt that the old hiring standards were too rigorous. This always happens with affirmative action. You start hiring people who don't meet the standards. Who knows what the level of training is that's given to those people? And then on top of that, this is the point that Debbie was making, and she's like, listen, the left's hostility to the idea of the cops, defund the police, demoralize the police department. And so as a result, in high crime cities, and by the way, Memphis is a dangerous town. We were there, 2 months ago, I guess it was, maybe a little longer, last summer. And there was a little Memphis kind of seafood restaurant that was just 2 blocks from our hotel. And yet the moment Debbie and I stepped on the street, just to walk 2 blocks, we felt suddenly this kind of, that queasy feeling you just get when you feel a little unsafe. You're sort of looking over your shoulder. You're just uneasy about it because it's not a safe environment. So this is obviously not going to be an easy job for cops to function in. I'm quite sure and you see this on the video, the cops are in a hair trigger mode. I mean, they will take, they are ready to move, ready to act and quick to act. And I would argue in this case, clearly precipitous action. I mean, there was no reason to tase that kid. There was no reason to beat him like that. And at one point, Tyree Nichols calls out to his mom. I mean, it's downright heartbreaking. It's almost hard to watch. It's important for us to realize that for those of us who we back the blue, but we don't back the blue indiscriminately. We back the blue for protecting us, for doing their job, for following their training, for keeping us safe in all senses of the term. I mean, I wouldn't feel safe if I was driving in Memphis and felt the cops have the right just to pull me over. No Miranda rights, no turn over your license, just drag the guy out of the car, start, tasing him, beating him. This is ridiculous. This should not be allowed. This has got to be stopped. And it's got to be stopped through accountability. So I'm glad accountability does appear to be occurring here. I have a lot more to say about this case, but there's a lot of other stuff going on in the news. So I'm going to pick it up tomorrow and go into it in more detail. Have you ever bought a towel set because it felt really soft in the store, but then when you go on to use it, it's not very absorbent? Well, it's basically a towel that's leaving you out to dry. That's why MyPillow has developed the MyPillow towels that work. I know it's mind-blowing, towels that actually dry you. Their 6-piece towel set includes 2 bath towels, 2 hand towels, 2 washcloths. They come in a variety of colors, and right now you can receive a 6-piece set for only $49.99 with promo code Dinesh. To receive this amazing offer on the 6-piece set of MyPillow towels, just go to MyPillow.com or call 800-876-0227. Again, that number, 800-876-0227, or go to MyPillow.com. Don't forget to use the promo code DINESH Dinesh. The newest edition of the Twitter Files, reported by Matt Taibbi, is not about censorship per se. It is about the use of the media as a vehicle for a systematic procession of lies. In this case, the lie is that the Russians are actively interfering in U.S. elections, and there are hundreds of accounts, maybe thousands of accounts, that are nothing more than Russian bots and Russian propaganda that is being, you may say, engineered out of Moscow. It's Putin's hand that is behind all this. Now, there was an organization that claimed to have a tracking mechanism and a dashboard in which they would list these accounts, reveal them to be the product of Russian disinformation, and they were trying to do 2 things. One is to get the media to cover this story of Russia involvement in U.S. elections, Russian disinformation on social media platforms like Twitter. The group that was doing this, that maintained the dashboard, was called Hamilton 68. And when you look at Hamilton 68 and its board of directors, it's people like Bill Kristol, the Never Trumper, Michael Chertoff, former head, I believe, of Homeland Security, Michael McFaul, who's a professor, I believe, now at Stanford University, John Podesta, formerly the head of the Hillary for America. So this is the Never Trump neocons and the left. And also people who are like deputy heads of the CIA, NSA. So this is deep state meets Never Trump meets the left. And these are becoming increasingly, by the way, the same people. And so Hamilton 68 said that they maintained this dashboard, and they would identify these sites. But as Twitter began to look into it, and this is Twitter, by the way, before Elon Musk. This is Twitter in the old regime. They realized that Hamilton 68 was putting out complete lies. In fact, here is a statement by Twitter from the internal communications. I think we need to call this out on the BS it is. Here's another comment by Twitter. This is the Twitter checkers inside of Twitter. Falsely accuses a bunch of legitimate right-leaning accounts of being Russian bots. So Twitter knew that these people were liars, that these weren't Russian bots. In fact, in some cases, they're well-known conservatives. There's a list of them that Matt Taibbi provides. One of them is this guy. In fact, honey, you'll get a good chuckle out of this. This is that fellow, Dennis Michael Lynch or whatever his name is. He was identified as a Russian bot by Hamilton 68. And Matt Taibbi calls up him and he goes, well, I'm the son of a veteran. I'm very much a real American. I'm a U.S. citizen. I'm just a normal guy trying to put out social media. He goes, this is absurd. This is nonsense. But the point is, Twitter knew it was nonsense. But here, interestingly, the plot thickens. Because inside of Twitter, you've got a bunch of people who, by the way, some of them later went on to work for the Biden administration. And they began to fight inside of Twitter not to expose this Hamilton 68 operation. So in other words, here's Twitter from its internal review saying, quote, these accounts are neither strongly Russian nor strongly bots. No evidence to support the statement that the dashboard is a finger on the pulse of Russian information ops. Quote, hardly illuminating a massive influence operation. There are hardly any Russians. Mostly ordinary Americans, Canadians, and British. And so it turns out that this Hamilton 68 was a fraudulent operation, really from top to bottom. By the way, this group has now put out a statement basically saying, and I sort of paraphrase, some accounts we track are automated bots, some are trolls, and some are real users. In other words, they're now admitting that their site is largely useless. And they go on to say, quote, it would therefore be incorrect without further analysis to label anyone or anything that appears on the dashboard as being connected to state-backed propaganda. So they're now admitting that this was essentially a bogus operation, but a bogus operation that Twitter knew about, and yet Twitter didn't blow the whistle on them. In fact, here are some Twitter executives that resisted the idea of outing these guys. Now, this is strangely a case where Yoel Roth, who was one of the content moderating main guys at Twitter, was a good guy. Yoel Roth says, quote, my recommendation at this stage is an ultimatum. You release the list or we do. He wanted to bust this group. By the way, the group is Alliance for Securing Democracy. They're actively involved with Hamilton 68. But Emily Horn, who then goes on, by the way, to work for the White House and work for the NSC, we have to be careful in how much we push back on ASD publicly. In other words, ASD is our friend. They're on our side. And then similarly, a guy, Carlos Monge, who goes on to become senior advisor to Buttigieg in the transportation office. I've been frustrated in not calling out Hamilton 68 more publicly, but understand we have to play a longer game here. In other words, let's not call them out publicly, even though we know that they're putting out complete lies. So what a sad and disgusting story of the way in which Bill Kristol, Michael McFaul, Podesta, and all these bad guys, this is the swampiest of the swamp creatures. And these are people, by the way, who make a lot of money out of this lying career that they've now set up for themselves. Similarly, Michael McFaul of Stanford, he's constantly putting out pompous tweets, acting like he's kind of some pillar of moral rectitude. These are basically termites. They are swamp creatures, and they deserve all the ignominious exposure that Elon Musk can give them. Because of you, Patriot Mobile has emerged as one of the leaders in the parallel economy, and they have big news. Patriot Mobile now offers service with all three major networks. This means if you're with the big three and like the service but don't like the values, you can access them with Patriot Mobile. Patriot Mobile also offers a performance guarantee. If you're not happy with your coverage, you can switch between the three major carriers for free. Patriot Mobile is America's only Christian conservative wireless provider. It offers nationwide coverage on the best 4G and 5G networks, so you get the same great service while supporting a company that fights to preserve our God-given rights and freedoms. This new year, resolve to stop supporting companies that don't align with your values. Patriot Mobile's 100% US-based customer service team makes switching easy. Just go to patriotmobile.com/Dinesh or call them at 878-PATRIOT. Get free activation today with the offer code Dinesh. That's patriotmobile.com/Dinesh or call 878-PATRIOT. Ronna McDaniel has been reelected as the chairwoman of the Republican National Committee. I was hoping that would not be the case. I don't normally get very involved in these kinds of races, but I think I felt as Ron DeSantis did, that when you've got an operation that is consistently losing, producing bad results, think of a corporate CEO who's got bad earnings for 4 years in a row, and Ronna McDaniel produced bad results in 2018, 2020, 2022. Now, I'm not saying this is single-handedly her fault, but the Republican National Committee is, in fact, the organization that is in charge of managing the strategy for the GOP, for the Republican Party, in elections. It's got resources to do it. It's got the strategic ability to do it. It is involved in races across the country. So who else are you going to blame if not the RNC? Harmeet Dillon, my friend Harmeet Dillon, a fellow Dartmouth grad, and Harmeet's been on the podcast before. I've also interviewed her in my book, 2000 Mules. And Harmeet's great. And Harmeet ran as a kind of resistance candidate, a candidate of the grassroots. And the final vote was something like 100 or so votes for Ronna, about 50 votes for Harmeet, and just a handful of votes for Mike Lindell, who was kind of the wild man in the race. And so what that tells you is that the power of the establishment in the Republican Party counts for kind of 2-to-1 over the grassroots, because I don't know a single grassroots Republican who was like, yeah, I think we need to keep Ronna McDaniel. I ran a Twitter poll on my site, which got tens of thousands of votes, and it was something like 90% or 95% for Harmeet. Trump put out a truth post in which he congratulated Ronna McDaniel, but immediately said something like, now let's get to the business of fixing our election. So seems to me that Trump is probably calculating that with DeSantis having come out against Ronna McDaniel, Trump, could probably benefit from the support of the RNC. And so Trump is making a sort of transactional endorsement. In fairness, Trump did endorse Ronna McDaniel the last time around as well. Now, there are some grassroots Republicans, and you see this all over social media, obviously disappointed, even disgusted. And I see some sentiment to the effect of, I'm done with the RNC. I don't think there's anything wrong in saying, look, until the RNC produces effective leadership, I'm not going to give money to the RNC. Debbie and I are not giving money to the RNC, and we wouldn't. But we do not take the view, this is very important, that we are done with the Republican Party or we need a new party. That is just nonsense talk. And that is a form of surrender to the other side. In fact, it's giving Democrats what they want. If you're saying something like, we don't need a Republican Party, you're being a good Democrat. Think of it. Think of how excited we would be if Democrats started saying, we don't need a Democratic Party anymore. We need a new party. American politics is fought in teams, and we have a two-party system. And so I like the idea that it's not original with me, that what Harmeet should do is to set up our own RNC. Maybe call it the RCC, the Republican Campaign Committee, or some name of that sort. And you know what? Why not have two organizations promoting Republican candidates? Maybe it'll turn out that some big donor money will go to the RNC. Maybe it'll turn out that some big donor money and a lot of grassroots money will go to the alternative group. And the alternative group can then make its own decisions about where to put money, which candidates to back. And so the problem represented by Ronna McDaniel in that case may not disappear entirely, but at least would be diminished. Now, it's a little relief to see Ronna McDaniel say, this is my last term, 2 more years, and then I'm out of there. I think this was kind of her concession to her critics, that I think she knows that she's not exactly popular as head of the RNC, but apparently the old dog wants to hang around for 2 more years, and I think that is unfortunate. Robert Kiyosaki is the author of the #1 best-selling personal finance book of all time, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. It sold over 40 million copies. Robert Kiyosaki understands the formulas for financial success and living a successful life. Debbie and I have come to know Robert. We've been inspired by his story of success through hard work and determination. He wants to teach you how to become successful too. You need to check out Robert Kiyosaki's 2023 live stream, which not only gives you access to a team of investors, market leaders, economists, but also includes Robert's financial predictions for this year. I strongly recommend you head to richdadworld.com/Dinesh for free access to the live stream and 2023 predictions. Plus, listeners of my podcast get a free copy of Robert's new book before it's even released to the public, and a recorded coaching session valued at $200 for free. Head to richdadworld.com/Dinesh. Get your free book, free access to the 2023 predictions live stream event. I'd like to talk about the Project Veritas video that exposed Jordan Walker. This is Pfizer's Director of Research and Development Strategic Operations. And here was a guy talking about how Pfizer manipulates these COVID cells in the lab to, well, essentially make them do different things. Manipulates them to become, in some cases, more active, more contagious, more lethal. And this fellow Jordan Walker, who, by the way, looks like he's, doesn't look like a top guy at Pfizer at all, because he doesn't have the kind of solemn gait of Albert Bourla, the CEO. This guy looks like he was kind of at a bar looking for a date. So initially I thought, is he just boasting? Is he just talking nonsense? But he was saying, look, we don't call it gain of function research, mind you. He's like, we call it directed evolution. Well, directed evolution is nothing more than you're manipulating. The evolution isn't occurring naturally. You're creating it in the lab. So this is a euphemism. It's a different phrase, but it seems to be a little bit of a distinction without a difference, a verbal game to, and then there was this amazing confrontation in which James O'Keefe showed up, and this guy, Jordan Walker, went absolutely berserk. He was like wrestling with, he fell on the floor. He tried to, the doors of the place were locked. This was just downright a mad scene. But it was also a scene of a guy who got caught. I mean, I've seen cases where a guy, shows up, he's a pedophile. He's looking for the 14-year-old girl, and there's the news crew, and then he runs away, and that's what this looked like. For a few days there, Pfizer went dead silent. And now Pfizer has issued a statement. And the statement is itself very telling, because I see it as a statement not of denial, but of confirmation. Pfizer, in effect, says, well, no, we don't really do gain-of-function research. And no, we don't really do directed evolution either. But yeah, we do manipulate viruses. And they used other language to say, again, the same thing. Because if you read their language and you go, well, what you're saying, in effect, is you take viruses, you alter them, you change them around. Now, again, Pfizer will say, I'm sure, of course we do this, and we kind of need to do it. And this is part of the way that we research these viruses, and this research provides the necessary foundation for making vaccines. And I think if this is the case, again, it's better to admit it. It's better to say, yeah, this is what we do. This is how we do it. These are the safeguards we have in place. See, the problem here is that there's distrust and there's no legitimate, not just public debate. Robert Malone, MD, co-founder of mRNA, was shocked to find out what he did. He's an expert in the field. And he goes, yeah, this very definitely is in effect gain of function. It's gain of function masquerading under a different name. By the way, when Project Veritas put the video up on YouTube, YouTube took it down. Why? They said misinformation. Well, what's the misinformation? Who's putting out the misinformation? Is it misinformation to interview a guy who is high up at Pfizer, who knows what Pfizer is doing, who provides an explanation? This is what Pfizer is doing, and it's on video. Where's the misinformation? Or is Jordan Walker being accused of putting out misinformation? Is it the case that he's misrepresenting Pfizer? Even Pfizer never really said that. And by the way, Jordan Walker's status at Pfizer remains a little murky at this point. They seem to have taken down all references to him. All those sleuths on social media have uncovered his resume, have posted that this guy, not only works at Pfizer, but he's not the janitor. No, he's not the, he does in fact have a high title, and he is in fact apparently a medical doctor. So it looks like Project Veritas, initially Debbie was like, I wonder if they got scammed, if this guy doesn't even really, he's just a comedian who's pretending to work at Pfizer. But no, he works at Pfizer. He's a legitimate source. I think Project Veritas did the kind of story that the news media should be doing, but doesn't. Think of it. The New York Times would never think of doing this kind of a hit. Never think of trying to find out what actually happens in the Pfizer lab. So kudos to James O'Keefe and Project Veritas for exposing a genuinely important story. Debbie and I started taking Relief Factor a couple of years ago. The difference we've seen in our joints the past 2 years has been nothing short of amazing. Aches and pains are gone thanks to this 100% drug-free solution called Relief Factor. Now, Relief Factor supports your body's fight against inflammation. That's the source of aches and pains. The vast majority of people who try Relief Factor love it. They order more because it works for them. Debbie's tried it. It works for her. She can now do the exercises that for a long time she wasn't able to do. So it's been a real game changer for her, her aunt, other members of our family, and for many other people. You too can benefit. Try it for yourself. Order the 3-week quick start for the discounted price of only $19.95. Go to relieffactor.com or call 833-690-7246 to find out more about this offer. That number again, 833-690-7246, or go to relieffactor.com. Feel the difference. Guys, I'm delighted to welcome to the podcast Erick Stakelbeck. He's the news director for TBN, Trinity Broadcasting Network. He's also the host of TBN's The Watchman Show and The Watchman Newscast on YouTube. By the way, watchmantv.com. That's where you can find it. And Erick's been covering the Middle East for a couple of decades. Erick, welcome to the podcast. It's really great to have you. Let's talk.
Great to be with you today.
Thank you. Let's talk about the Middle East generally. There might be a lot of people who think, well, the Middle East at one point was vital to American security, American energy needs. We were heavily oil dependent. We were being manipulated by OPEC in the 70s and 80s. But the United States is much more oil self-sufficient. Supposedly, we're moving away from fossil fuels. Would you say that the Middle East has a radically different position in terms of America's interests in the world, or do we still have vital interests over there, and what are they?
Dinesh, I still think we have vital interest over there in terms of security. First and foremost, it is the most volatile, chaotic, yet strategic region in the world. I know the Biden administration is doing this pivot to the east, to China, which makes sense in a lot of ways. But you still have the likes of Iran in the middle of the Middle East, and you have Russia, every superpower, basically. It's almost like a gravitational pull to that region where people can't stay out. So Russia now is obviously in Syria, the Iranian regime driving towards nuclear weapons. This is a serious threat. Iran also part of what I call the Gathering Storm Coalition, China, Russia, North Korea, and the Iranian regime working together towards their own anti-Western interests. So I believe because of just the glut of American adversaries that are still operating in that region. We do have an interest there. And it seems every time America completely removes itself from the Middle East, and look, I'd love to be out of the Middle East entirely, but it seems that every time we do that, Dinesh, we leave a vacuum that's filled by some of the world's worst actors. And also, lastly, look, we have a great ally there in Israel, of course, which is kind of the first line of defense for Western civilization in the belly of the beast in the Middle East. Of course, we have the Sunni Arab nations there as well, which we have strong relationships with. So we still do have interest there for sure.
I mean, it seemed when the Iranian Revolution occurred, 1979, the initial objective was to eradicate the influence, the secularizing influence of the Shah, to create a kind of deeply Islamic society. I find it interesting that the radical Muslims are fairly quick, however, to project their influence abroad. I learned from Debbie first about how the Iranians are very active in faraway Venezuela, in addition, by the way, to the Chinese and the Russians. So talk about Iran's objectives. They clearly are not confined to the Middle East. Does Iran see itself as an emerging world power? What's it up to?
It does, Dinesh, on a few levels. And you said it, in 1979, the Ayatollah Khomeini came to power. He always saw this as a global revolution. It's not just an Iran thing, a localized revolution. He saw this as a global movement, and the current leadership in Iran, which are his acolytes, they see it the same way. So we have an Iranian presence on at least 5 continents through its elite unit. I kind of compare them to the Nazi SS, Dinesh, the Revolutionary Guards Corps. If you remember Qasem Soleimani, who was eliminated in a drone strike ordered by President Trump, January 2020, he was one of the main figures in this group, but they have their tentacles through this group throughout the world. You mentioned Venezuela. Debbie and I have talked about this for years, actually. Iran right now has a very close relationship with the regime of Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela. It really started over a decade ago under Hugo Chavez, those ties, to the point, Dinesh, where last summer, Iran and Venezuela signed a 20-year cooperation agreement. Now, it's mainly focused on weapons and oil. Iran will supply weapons to Venezuela. It will get more involved. Remember, Venezuela is an oil-rich country. Iran will get more involved in the energy sector in Venezuela as well. And then the big story I've been reporting on The Watchman as of late, Iran vowed earlier this month that by the end of 2023, they will send warships for the first time to the Panama Canal at America's doorstep. Now, a lot of people shrugged and said, oh, it's a bluff, it's bluster. And yet, right now, we have 2 Iranian warships docked in Brazil at a port in Brazil. Already, you see the bitter fruits of Lula, that radical leftist who just was sworn in Brazil once again. But 2 Iranian warships docked there, Dinesh, and their plan reportedly is to make a stop in Venezuela, surprise, surprise, and then transit to the Panama Canal sometime in February. So that Iranian declaration of having a presence in the Panama Canal looks like it was not bluster, and it is coming to fruition right now.
I mean, I find it interesting, Eric, that you got these countries like Iran and China, and they're countries that are sort of ideologically based. In the case of Iran, of course, it's the Iranian Revolution. In the case of China, it is a certain hybrid of communism. And yet they seem to go all over the world and deal on a transactional basis with other people. In other words, the Iranians aren't going to Maduro and saying, listen, we expect to see you in the mosque. We want you to convert to Islam. None of that. The Chinese aren't going over to African countries and saying to them, hey, listen, we need you to adopt the communist ideology and start reading the Red Book of Chairman Mao. Not at all. They basically make deals based upon oil, we'll give you weapons if you give us oil. So you have a sort of combination, don't you, of ideology and realpolitik.
You do, Dinesh. You mentioned the word transactional. That's the way they see it. And we know the old adage, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Again, the Gathering Storm Coalition, China, Russia, Iran, North Korea. If you look at those 4 regimes, far-flung ideologies, serious ideological differences, and yet they will work together towards that common goal, which is essentially undermining the United States and undermining the Western world order. That's the ultimate goal for these regimes. So you will see Iran, again, not demanding that Maduro, who is an avowed Marxist socialist, converts to Islam. They're not demanding that. It's a transactional relationship that works in Iran's interest. Look at Russia and Iran right now. Look, Vladimir Putin fought Islamic jihadists in the form of the Chechens for years, and yet now he's shoulder to shoulder with jihadists in the form of the Iranian regime and Hezbollah in Syria and elsewhere. It doesn't seem to make much sense, but this serves Russia's interest. You think of Iran's energy sector. You think of Iran right now supplying Russia with drones. So it's very interesting, Dinesh, you make a great point, how these regimes will kind of throw aside those ideological pillars to work together towards common goals of, again, weakening the Western world order. They're making that very clear.
Let's take a pause. When we come back, let's talk about Israel, the recent terrorist attack in Israel, and also the complex relationship between the Netanyahu government and the Biden government. We'll be right back. There are times when we all need a fresh start. Now, the phrase literally means an opportunity to begin something again. You know you need a fresh start in your eating habits, right? How many times last year did you say to yourself, I need to start eating better? Well, eating the right amounts of fruits and veggies every day is almost impossible. I have a much better way, a more convenient way for you to make that fresh start with Balance of Nature. Sourced from 31 whole fruits and vegetables, you'll get maximum nutrition with their star product, fruits and veggies in a capsule. Debbie and I take them every day. I want you to do so also. And right now, take advantage of the New Year's offer from Balance of Nature. Get $25 off plus free fiber and spice with your first preferred order of fruits and veggies. When you use discount code AMERICA, the offer can end at any time, so go ahead, call 800-246-8751. That's 800-246-8751, or go to balanceofnature.com. Use discount code AMERICA. I'm back with expert commentator Erick Stakelbeck. He spent 2 decades covering the Middle East. He's news director for TBN, the Trinity Broadcasting Network. Erick, let's talk about Israel. There was recently a terror attack in Israel. I think 7 people dead. Talk a little bit about what's happening there. Some of the media is presenting it, and even the New York Times, as the Netanyahu government has come in, and this has kind of upset the stability of the region, almost as if to say that he has annoyed the radicals to the point where they've been pushed into doing this. What are the implications of the Netanyahu government? And then I want to ask you about its relationship with Biden.
Yeah, Dinesh, let me just mention first real quick. It always amuses me when the New York Times and others say this move by Israel is going to set the region on fire. The region has been on fire for over 2,000 years. So things aren't changing too markedly there in the Middle East. But with the Netanyahu government, number one, let's talk about the terror attack, number one, in Jerusalem during Shabbat, Friday night, people leaving Shabbat services, Friday night prayers, gunned down by a Palestinian terrorist outside of the synagogue. This is not an isolated incident. Obviously, this kind of heinous terror attack has happened time and time again in Israel over the years. With the Netanyahu government, the main issue right now, Dinesh, is the Temple Mount. Now, atop the Temple Mount, the most coveted piece of real estate in the world, the very heart of Jerusalem, that is where the 2 Jewish temples once stood, as described in the Bible, Solomon's temple and the second temple, which Jesus taught in. He chased out the money changers. Today, the Dome of the Rock, the Al-Aqsa Mosque, those 2 Muslim shrines sit atop the Temple Mount. The status quo, as they call it, since 1967, since the Six-Day War, is that Jews can go on the Temple Mount, but they cannot pray openly atop the Temple Mount. And if they do, they are either arrested or escorted off the site. Now, Muslim authorities control the Temple Mount, but there are many Jews now, Dinesh, and there's kind of a groundswell in Israel who are saying, hey, wait a minute. Our forefathers prayed atop the Temple Mount 3,000 years ago. Why can't we pray openly there today? And me as a Christian, I can't pray openly atop the Temple Mount. I've been on top of it many times. Again, they'll be arrested. They'll be thrown in prison. So you have Muslims now who are, you have 2 competing narratives here. You have Jews saying, hey, we're not causing any trouble. We just want to pray on the Temple Mount. You have Muslims, the likes of the Palestinian Authority and Hamas, chief among them, saying, you're trying to desecrate the Al-Aqsa Mosque and start World War III, essentially. So you have a collision course over the Temple Mount. Many members of Netanyahu's new government want to see that status quo change. They're saying, hey, enough is enough. We should be able to pray there. Netanyahu's saying, no, we're not going to change the status quo. But again, there is a groundswell, including among members of his own government.
It seems to me part of the problem here is that you've got just a different psychology, don't you? In other words, a Muslim can go to St. Peter's Cathedral in Rome, walk in, take a good look around, and if there's a mass going on, sit down and listen to what's being said, participate if he or she wants to. But you or I couldn't go on a Hajj to Mecca and show up. We would be pushed out, right? In other words, the idea is that Mecca is only for devout Muslims. And it seems like a similar mentality is at work here. In other words, there are Christian churches all over Israel, and those are open in the sense I just described. But somehow the Al-Aqsa Mosque is like off limits. And isn't it controlled by the Jordanian government? Explain a little bit what the kind of complex dynamics and this weird truce that has held all this time. And how does one resolve a situation when it comes into that kind of almost a theological blockade?
Yeah, Dinesh, key point. Jordan does control the site. Let me just mention, by the way, to your earlier point, I tried to enter the Dome of the Rock a few months ago. There was a Muslim authority at the doorway. I said, I'd like to come in. And he said, are you a Muslim? I said, no. He said, then you cannot enter. So that crystallizes what you just laid out. But with the Temple Mount, it is very complex, but to break it down in its bare essence, in 1967, Israel won the Six-Day War in dramatic fashion. At that time, Islam allowed the Muslims to retain control of the Temple Mount. Now, Israel could have took the whole Temple Mount, but they allowed Islamic authorities to retain control. That would be Jordan. When Israel won that war in 67, Jordan actually controlled half of Jerusalem at that time. It's hard to believe today, but that was a fact. Israel allowed Jordanian religious authorities to maintain control there on the Temple Mount. And that has not changed up until today, to the point where King Abdullah, the Jordanian king, who has been an ally of the West, Western educated, basically threatened Israel, hey, don't cross our red lines on the Temple Mount. It's caused a lot of animosity between Israel and Jordan, two nations which have a peace treaty, but it's kind of a cold peace. And a big part of that is the Temple Mount. Jordan seems to be clinging on desperately, trying to maintain control. But Dinesh, I think a day is coming where that status quo will change, and you will see Jews eventually taking a greater role on the Temple Mount. I don't know when, but again, there's a lot of support building for that in Israel.
We only have about a minute, but Eric, let's close out by me asking you about, is the Biden administration, I mean, I know they're not too friendly to Netanyahu. Are they kind of taking the Muslim side, if you will, in this controversy? What is their position?
Yeah, they are adamant, the Biden officials, that they do not want to see, again, that status quo change. And they're really pressuring Israel. And even at the UN, the Biden administration has been pressuring Israel over this Temple Mount issue. Of course, the UN is viciously anti-Israel. I see a collision course coming, diplomatic collision course, between the Biden administration and the Netanyahu government on a few issues. Number one, Iran, because that Iran deal, although it looks dead now, it's kind of like a vampire that keeps coming to life because of Western leaders pushing it. Iran, Israeli communities in Judea and Samaria, the West Bank. The Biden administration is adamantly opposed to Israel building there. And the Temple Mount. I think those three issues are going to lead to a diplomatic collision course. Remember, Joe Biden was vice president under the most anti-Israel president in American history, Barack Obama, and many of those same officials worked in both administrations. So I think rocky times lie ahead.
Wow, Eric, great stuff. Thanks for joining me. I really appreciate it. We're going to have you back as these things continue to unfold.
Thanks, Dinesh.
I've been talking about evidence for the Big Bang, not just the theoretical evidence, such as Einstein's theory of relativity, which predicts an expanding universe, but also observational evidence. And I talked last week about Penzias and Wilson, from Bell Labs and their ability to hear the cosmic background microwave radiation. Unbelievable. The whisper from the early universe. So all of this by the latter part of the 20th century had established a scientific consensus in favor of the Big Bang. That is actually not something that is even really up for debate. And a lot of the critics of the Big Bang sort of admitted that they were wrong. In fact, here's Arthur Eddington, who finally concedes the Big Bang is true. But what's interesting is he goes on to say this: the beginning, the idea of a beginning, seems to present insuperable difficulties unless we agree to look on it as frankly supernatural. Wow. And Arno Penzias, who won the Nobel Prize for his discovery of the background radiation, he says this: the best data we have are exactly what I would have predicted had I nothing to go on but the 5 books of Moses, the Psalms, and the Bible as a whole. So for Penzias, the discovery of the microwave radiation and the confirmation of the Big Bang are essentially a restatement of what was already said in the book of Genesis. Here's astronomer Robert Jastrow in what I think is a beautiful image. Quote, "For the scientist who has lived by his faith in the power of reason, the story ends like a bad dream. He has scaled the mountains of ignorance. He is about to conquer the highest peak. As he pulls himself over the final rock, he is greeted by a band of theologians who have been sitting there for centuries." So this is, I think, very fascinating. The Bible, by the way, is not a science book. It doesn't try to give a detailed account of how the creation was done. But the account it does give is accurate, is supported by the best of modern science. And now we have a sort of proof of God that emerges out of all this, because in a sense, science has supplied what you can call the missing link. Here's the proof. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe has a cause. That cause we call God. Now, for a long time, the denial of the Creator was based upon denying the second proposition. In other words, for a long time, the atheists would say, let's look at Newtonian science, let's look at Galileo. We can see from these things that the universe did not have to, and in fact did not, have a beginning. And the universe is a kind of perpetual motion machine. It's always been there. But now science has removed that argument. The universe did, in fact, have a beginning. And so atheists now, especially atheist scientists, are reduced to denying the first proposition. They have to deny that everything that has a beginning has a cause. They have to say, in effect, everything that has a beginning does not necessarily have a cause. And think of what a difficult position that is to sustain. But that's the position that Bertrand Russell essentially twisted himself into. He says the universe is just there, and that's all. But this is really not an explanation. This is an avoidance of explanation. And even David Hume, the most skeptical of all the philosophers who attacked the so-called argument from design, here's Hume. He doesn't deny causation at all. By the way, Hume is famous for his critique of causation, but Hume is not denying causation. He's denying our knowledge of causation. So Hume's critique of causation is not a critique of causation, it's a critique of the limits of human knowledge. But here's Hume, I'm quoting him now, 1754, quote, "I have never asserted so absurd a proposition as that anything might arise without a cause." So Hume is here frankly admitting that if the universe had a beginning, it must have been caused. And since the universe is a material object that encompasses all the material that there is, everything that exists, in a sense, is in the universe, then the cause of the universe can't be material. It has to be immaterial. Another way to put it is it has to be supernatural. And it doesn't really strain credulity. In fact, it's completely consistent with modern scientific knowledge to say that the creation of the universe is, in fact, a miracle.
Subscribe to the Dinesh D'Souza podcast on Apple, Google, and Spotify, or watch on Rumble, YouTube, and SalemNow.com.